I'm starting the YouTube stream now.
Good evening, everyone. It's really good to see everybody here. This is absolutely our last meeting and probably the most significant of all those 10 meetings we've had since we started this process in May. And I must say, I tell you this every time we meet, that I'm just impressed with the focus, the attendance, the dialogue, the things that led to this first draft, which I find to be pretty good, pretty outstanding. We took a crash course, all of us, on the Charlotte City Council's adopted plans that touched on various elements of mobility. We heard from peer cities about their successes and their failures. We talked about our desired outcomes. We worked through different elements of the network itself, discussing funding options, and finally we are here tonight to make a final recommendation. Your efforts have led us to the point where we are about ready to make what I will call actionable recommendations on a bold, transformational mobility network that has the potential, and this is not hyperbole, but it has the potential to shape our community for generations to come. Last week, we walked through elements of our recommendation, and you provided great input on the question, what do we recommend? What are we going to say to the mayor and the city council as a task force? I also appreciated some of the robust comments, suggestions, and insights that I have heard since the draft recommendations. I've been reading some of your stuff as late as 12 o'clock at night, emails that you've sent to me regarding what we had discussed previously. But tonight, we are going to cover several important topics in the recommendation, and then we'll have some time to get some public comments on our recommendation. And then I will give everybody here, everybody out there, an opportunity to share your sentiments. Everyone on the task force is going to be heard from tonight. Even if you want to say no more than, hey, I like what's happening, that's all. To our most, we just want to hear your opinion, and we'll go through that process. When the time comes, I'm going to encourage all of you to participate. I always want to remind you that you have a chance with this digital raise your hand button to participate in the conversation as we go forward before we get to our final comments. So get ready, because everybody's going to speak tonight, right? All right. Before we get into the recommendations, let me hand this off to Taiwo to talk a little bit about what happens after we make our recommendations to the City Council.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Gan. Appreciate the opportunity to see everyone again tonight. So on December 14, obviously, at the very beginning, we laid it out that the task force will be wrapping up its work in December. And so December 14, we will be bringing forward the work you've spent countless number of hours and meetings and months working on. We'll bring that forward to Mayor and City Council on December 14, and Council will be receiving and hopefully accepting the recommendations on December 14. And then they will consider what's next after that, but there will be a subsequent meeting again in January for Council as they review the document. So hopefully you will all tune in to that meeting, and hopefully it will be an opportunity for us to also hear from the community. But the big work is tonight, and that will really set us up very well for a council briefing on December 14th. We will send out information to you prior to that will give you information with regards to the time of council briefing that evening, so that you are able to listen in to the discussions. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer questions about this if you have any at the end of the meeting. Thanks.
All right. And now we will hand it over to Stephen, who is going to walk us through several key topics and points in the recommendation. Stephen, you've got the floor.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Gant. I want to thank everyone for their time. Obviously, there's a lot of effort that's gone into this. As I shared with you during our last meeting, we spent a lot of time together and we learned a lot together. And that is evident in the work that's been generated to date. Over 9 months, and I'll correct this slide because this is the slide we used at the last meeting. This is meeting number 10. As Mayor Gant alluded to, we've developed research together and we've developed recommendations together. And tonight, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about those recommendations. All of you received a copy of the draft report, which is not intended to be essentially the plan, but is essentially to be the way with which we memorialize our journey together. And specifically, we organized this in the most simple of ways because it didn't need to be complicated. It focused on why we're doing this, what our response is to our changing and increasing needs, and how we might achieve what the mayor alluded to as the transformational mobility network, and something we've come to refer to as a mobility investment program, in fact. And so one of the great things about having the privilege of authoring this on your behalf is that we knew we weren't going to get it 100% correct the first go around. And I appreciate some of the kind words. It's a good report, but it's not right yet. And we've received several comments from many of you thus far. Some of them are phone calls. Some of those were meetings took place over Zoom or otherwise. And some of those were some very thoughtful emails. And we don't take lightly the time that you've put in to sharing those ideas. And we wanted to take the opportunity this evening to dive a little bit deeper into what those words really mean, and can we make this better than the draft so that we can call it final and share it, deliver it, and report it to City Council. And so tonight, we're going to spend about 40 to 45 minutes using that time productively, not to go through every section of the report, but really to focus on refining the recommendations. We feel like if we can find some general consensus about the wording of the recommendations, it will serve us well, and we can all stand together to support the outcomes of our shared work together. And so with that, I'm going to ask Ed here to forward the slides and remind us a little bit about what our recommendations were, but I'm quickly going to migrate to some revisions. In the interest of time, what I share with you on screen right now is a representation of what was in the draft report. This is the first recommendation: invest in mobility as a response to our increasing and changing needs, and a lot of supporting statements about that. I'll share with you that one of the very poignant observations by many of you was that while we like this wording, in fact, the wording of the report, we need to be more specific. We need to be clear. We need to be direct. And to borrow Mayor Gant's terminology, we need to position ourselves to be actionable. And so what we're going to do tonight is maybe not focus so much on what was in the draft. We want to show you that we're listening to what you've shared with us in the way of comments. And we've put together some revisions to these drafts. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into our first attempt at a revision to recommendation number 1. And I'm going to read it aloud for those of you who might be reading or participating on small screens tonight. It essentially, the title remains the same: invest in mobility to meet our changing needs. But we've taken the steps of making this much more specific. So with your permission, I'm going to read through this. The task force proposes a mobility investment program. It isn't just the TMN, it's the program that makes the Transformational Mobility Network possible. It's designed to achieve the vision of the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. for safe and equitable mobility. We heard from several of you the importance of making a strong connection to the comprehensive plan, making them inexorably linked together so that they function as one. This program isn't a transformational mobility network of key this program is a transformational mobility network of key multimodal projects and investments from adopted plans implemented together in a 10-year time frame to advance our mobility goals. So I think that there's a key phrase in there, and it's they come from adopted plans and plans that already have public support and plans that are currently underway. So we're being very specific here. And while that's the preamble to this particular recommendation, the real meat of it, as with all the recommendations, falls in the supporting statements. And so I'm going to migrate on to these, and hopefully we can come back and reflect on any needed changes to them. The first of which is a recommendation for endorsing the Mobility Investment Program, heretofore referred to as the Transformational Mobility Network, funded and supported with state and federal partnerships, and fully fund the local portion of that, which is $4 to $6 billion. So we're being very clear here that this assumes partnerships. We will invest in those partnerships, but our commitment is to fully fund our local portion, $4 to $6 billion. The second supporting statement is adopting a strategic mobility plan in 2021 that refines the transformational mobility network and establishes a strategy for how we evaluate, prioritize, design, and integrate our mobility investments. This is the first reference to integration as it builds on that reference back to the comprehensive plan. There are other recommendations that reinforce this throughout the report. And then lastly, committing to ongoing communication that builds community trust and understanding, measures and regularly reports progress through a community dashboard, and leverages metrics that support the goal of the 2040 comprehensive plan. So in total, this is our attempt at refining recommendation number 1 to be very deliberate and specific. And with that, Mayor, I'd like to maybe establish a cadence where we introduce the recommendation and then pause and see if there's some comment on the proposed changes.
Yes, of course. Do I hear any comments from the members of the task force? I think, Eric?
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry.
Eric has his hand raised. Was that Ernie Regal?
And then Ernie's, yeah, could go after me. I was just going to point out, because I was going to save it for one of my final comments, that so one of the first things I wrote down is I very much like the identification of a mode share target that was in the original piece of number 1. So this may fall under the accountability piece, number 2, that we're not getting to, but just want to point that out that I think losing that specific, if we're going for specific here, we lost that word, that verbiage in that section. So as long as it occurs somewhere else, I might be happy, but I think having that as a specific identifiable call outs to having a mode share somewhere is very important. Thank you.
Eric, I may be able to foreshadow a bit that it's not lost. We're about to encounter it. I appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Any other comments? Let's see. We had
I had one.
Ernie Regal.
Yeah. In number 1 there, where we say we fund and supported with state and federal partnerships and fully fund. This may be a minor point, but what if there are other sources other than state and federal partnerships, for example, public-private partnerships? And I don't know that we need to have it in there necessarily, but I don't want to be in a position where down the road we don't look to something like that if it's available.
I think that's an excellent point, and probably a nice refinement to this was brought to our attention as well, that we also need to look to our county partners for support. So with your permission, we might decide to make a more inclusive reference to partnerships, local, private, as well as federal and state.
Sounds good.
All right. Are there other members of the task force that have some questions about recommendation number 1? Quiet.
Great, let's,
Did you get one?
I was just waiting. I was just waiting to make sure nobody else did. I just wanted to pose this kind of like Ernie's question. The adopted plans in the first preamble there. What hypothetically, if we go through, like we've done several times with the current 2030 plan, where we have the extension to Ballantyne per se, or something like that, is it any adopted plan going forward? Is it the only adopted plans going from the past? Like, how would we handle if we need to modify, extend, add anything to the current plans that are already passed, especially after we get through the 10-year period and we're financing for 30 years? We have those 20 years in between if we wanted to add and there's still funding. Is this flexible enough to be able to have that ability to propose other plans or additions to go forth in front of council to be adopted on?
yeah, that's a great question. And let me offer a clarification and see if it suffices. So we've attempted to future-proof this by simply referencing adopted plans. And to your point, there'll be new plans and modified plans during this time frame. So one of the things that we're recommending, and it's embedded in this already, is that we would adopt a strategic mobility plan. Some of that essentially is coalescing our existing plans into a central repository. Getting a little wonky here with my terms, I apologize, but bringing things all together. And then a recognition that anything that we would spend significant dollars on would require some kind of approval or adoption, right? So if we were to adopt a new type of plan or amend a plan, we would have a formal action that would result in it serving as the current version of the adopted plan. And therefore, because we're focused on building a program, it would become eligible through this process. Great. I'm going to take the 2 thumbs
other
up as
words,
that's
it's,
adequate.
Did you want to say something?
Pedro?
Yeah.
I just wanted to really ask a question and make a comment that under the federal Title VI of the Federal Civil Rights Act, any issues that we send out has to be sent in other languages in our community. And my question is whether or not this is also going to be published in Spanish, in Urdu, or the other languages that are part of our community, for the sake of both inclusion, equity, and demonstrating our commitment to those communities.
Yes. The answer is yes, Pedro.
Thank you very much.
Eba?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to comment that I appreciate the umbrella of using just a generalized term of adopted plans for the exact same point that Stephen made. Number one. Number two, I appreciate the identification and the specificity of calling out the 2040 plan and how these two are intertwined. Just wanted to make those 2 comments. Thank you.
You're welcome, Kiba. Jean? Jim, I'm sorry.
Sure. I have a problem with the fully fund statement. I think at this point, without understanding those other local sources, especially, I don't think that our neighboring communities have been engaged or coordinated with enough at this point. So I would prefer that we soften that a little bit, pending support of those types of things. I'm struggling with the commitment of the city solely in this. And I realize that there's state and federal, but For the 4 to 6 billion, which I think is still a low number, as I've stated in the past, I'm very concerned about recommending fully funding this without coordination with other local communities.
Good point,
Well,
Jim. If I can respond to that quickly, that we've been actually engaging all the towns in the county, Pineville, Matthews. Matthews is represented on the task force, but we've been engaged not only with the mayors, but also with the town managers. We've presented this to the Metropolitan Transit Commission as well. So while the task force has been working, we've also been engaging our regional partners, the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. Everyone is fully aware of the $4 to $6 billion local portion, and that when we get to that point, this is not just about Charlotte, but it's also about the county. We've engaged the county, we've presented this, and we'll continue to present it to them as well. So you bring up a good point that we make sure that we are coordinating this, as this is not just about Charlotte, but we have been coordinating with the county and other towns within the county, as well as regional entities.
Okay, and I would just ask that the wording address that specifically in some way, that it's pending coordinated support of or something. I'm worried that there's going to be a commitment from Charlotte and not from neighboring communities, and we're going to be on the hook for that full 4 to 6 billion that I think is actually going to be more than 4 to 6 billion.
Jim, maybe I'm lost a little bit, but if in fact we talk about a sales tax increase, we're going to have to sell this way beyond the limits of the city of Charlotte.
Sure.
It's going to have to be sold to the entire county, because that is going to be, I don't believe the General Assembly will enable us to simply put that tax out for just the city of Charlotte. It is going to be a county-wide referendum, which means just by definition, the county is going to have to buy in to some extent.
Okay, I'm just asking that be included in the wording, so that
I'm not sure how to include it though. What I'm saying is, if we endorse the network, I don't know how we say we don't endorse fully funding the network. At least that's a goal that we ought to have.
I'm not
you're right.
questioning
We may not
the goal at
achieve
all.
it, but it's a goal. And I think when we make that recommendation to the council, they would fully recognize that, that we want to fully fund it. For a lot of reasons, we want to do that, but it has to be supported ultimately far beyond the limits of the city of Charlotte.
Sure, and perhaps it gets addressed in the funding slide when we get to that. I'm not questioning the objective, the goal, the aspiration here at all. I support it 100%. I just want to make sure that we're adequately communicating the expectation.
It is interesting that you did point out that you didn't think that that the $4 to $6 billion would be adequate to support this process.
Yeah,
I think that's the first time I've heard you say that. So
no, I raised it 2 meetings ago when we met in person, and I raised a larger number speculatively before the 8 to $12 billion number was shared. Just based on doing some back of the napkin type of math on what we paid for the blue line, the latest portion of the blue line, the northern portion. I'm in looking at the number of miles that needs to be covered by silver and red, and obviously the gold is at a lower cost because of the street component. But I'm just questioning at least the light rail component of that.
okay, thank you. Geraldine?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I just want to support Jim's comments that he made just now, just about how to, thoughtfully and sensitively sort of walk this line of supporting the work that the task force has done, while also being sort of cognizant of the broader political context of neighboring communities in the county. And might just want to suggest that we add actively pursue full funding of the local rest of the sentence to give a little flexibility that, we're pursuing it. There's obviously no guarantee, but perhaps that gives a little bit of compromise language and confirms the intention of the task force while also giving a little flexibility about what's to come. Just want to offer that up.
Okay, thanks, Geraldine. Other comments? Do we have any?
No, not at this time.
All right, Stephen?
Great. Let's go back to the slide deck then and remind ourselves of recommendation section number 2. And in the original, you'll all have your copies in front of you, of course, but once again, what you see on screen at this moment is an excerpt from the draft, and the heading is holding ourselves accountable for successfully implementing the program. So if the first recommendation really is expressing an intent to develop a program and essentially describing the scale of the program, this second section seeks to hold ourselves accountable for that. Now, we certainly heard a lot of comments from individuals about these last 2 recommendations in particular. And so we've taken a stab at making some revisions to that. And so let's take a look at some of those revisions, and I'll point them out as we go. So we take to heart that we need to align this initiative, and we chose in this particular recommendation to articulate that alignment and then use recommendation number 3 to punctuate the how we might pay for this, the funding strategy. So I hope that there's an appreciation for being very deliberate with how we're building recommendation 1, 2, and 3. And I recognize you're being hit with this for the first time tonight, so we'll take it slowly. So the task force proposes an intentional commitment to aligning our mobility investment program with the goals and strategies of the 2040 Comprehensive Plan and priorities of affordable housing and upward mobility. So now we're beginning to build and offer a bit more specificity. It's not just the comprehensive plan. We know that we heard from a number of you that we've got to mention specifically affordable housing and upward mobility with this recommendation. Therefore, the task force recommends the following. Identifying a mode share target, Eric, right? There it is, to measure our progress and prioritize mobility investments to ensure we achieve our strategic energy action plan and Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan objectives. There are several objectives within the comprehensive plan that have been articulated by many of you on the task force, for which we know there is a direct link to transportation. And so we've made that common linkage in this particular statement. The second, and this is definitely a strengthened statement from what was in the draft, creating a program of anti-displacement investments to fund the preservation and increase of affordable housing, financing tools, and other anti-displacement strategies along our transit corridors. You all made it very clear that the one thing we want to avoid, if at all possible, is that we're going to make this investment, let's not inadvertently create new problems or exacerbate existing problems. And so I appreciate the language that was offered by many of you to encourage the strengthening of that. And then lastly, this is building off of conversation from our last meeting, exploring the feasibility of a transit fare reduction, or in some cases, that, just to be clear, includes fare-free sort of investigations and evaluations. So we've done our best to think about the things that you have been consistent in articulating as being important details to this particular recommendation. And I'll pause now because I'm sure there's going to be some comments about those amendments to this particular recommendation.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. Anybody got their hands raised? I'm not able to. Ernie?
Yeah, I've got a question on the anti-displacement language. I've had trouble sort of following that. Create a program of anti-displacement investments to fund. So are we saying out of the money that the city, et cetera, raises through taxes and everything, a part of that will be isolated and used to fund preservation and increase affordable housing? Is that what we're saying?
I think we are allowing ourselves to be inspired by what we learned from the Austin initiative to essentially blend a displacement and an affordability element into their mobility investment program. The language is essentially allowing some degree of flexibility because the investment could take a number of forms. Investment could be programmatic, where dollars are used, but they also can be partnerships. They also can be policies, and they also can influence our practice of project development as well. And so we tried to maintain a broad umbrella to allow those tools to evolve should we get support for this program.
Well, I also like the notion, I like the term anti-displacement investments, Ernie, because so often we go forward with these programs and we realize after the fact that we may have removed, we may have done some things that do damage to the existing area without, in fact, mitigating the problems and the damage that might occur. So I could see if there were funds reserved in this program for situations that occurred like that, that we might be helping or partnering with developers to put in more affordable housing where displacements might have occurred as a result of putting in the mobility network. So
no, I'm good. I'm good with all that.
I personally think that's a great addition. Now, how you fund that might be a question that might be raised, i.e. whether or not you could write that into language that would allow us to do that. Other comments?
Mayor Gant, David Ward here.
David?
I agree. I really like these new points, but I'm curious as to whether or not the funding, and I'm thinking particularly for bullets 2 and 3, was considered in the overall budget that we are anticipating for this. And if not, maybe we should build in a little flexibility around that intended total amount and the intended 4 to 6 billion local funding, so that if these if these move forward and that 4 to 6 becomes 5 to 7 or 8, it's not going to hurt our credibility in terms of generating support for this. And Geraldine, I apologize. You may have addressed this in your remarks just now, that building in that kind of flexibility. My kids are eating dinner and I heard a crash in the kitchen, so I had to go off video and run out to check. Fortunately, the dog took care of most of it, but I did miss most of your comments, and I'm sorry about that. I think we were discussing something around that 4 to 6 billion, so that might have been part of it. But I just wonder if we ought to build in a little flexibility around the anticipated total budget, particularly considering that there's some new things that I think are important that we are considering right now.
That's a very good point, and it really, I think in another day and time, we might have been looking just at the hardware to build the greenways, the transit, and whatever. And through your input from this entire task force, we have heard a number of things that don't normally fit into the standard way we do business. And one of them has been everything from gentrification to the need for affordable housing to other kinds of social aspects that might impinge upon this being a successful program. I've got Bill Cox next, and then William.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, everyone. Stephen, I appreciate it. Whoever created this language, I appreciate it very much, and I appreciate the inclusion of this in the document. The manner in which it is worded implies that it will be implemented through investment. The last part of the sentence, other anti-displacement strategies, is sort of a catch-all, but when you call the program investments, you imply that there will always be money exchanged in order to accomplish this. There may be, as I think Stephen mentioned, policy or programmatic mechanisms that would allow this effort to occur without including public dollars. And so some wordsmithing on that, perhaps, to create an anti-displacement program that includes investment, blah, 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 and other
Bill?
anti-displacement strategies.
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to test something with you because, I struggled with what the right word was. Ed and I were both back and forth. Investment was something we thought the task force might be looking for because it seems to make a bold statement that we should put our money where our mouth is, for example. But to your point, it really is a suite of tools. And within the toolbox, of course, funding is a clear centerpiece. Policy without funding still can be effective as well, but the combination of the two is really strong. And so I'm curious, is strategy, like anti-displacement strategy or anti-displacement program, a preferred? Do you have a preference, and does anyone have a preference if we were to amend that language?
I actually like anti-displacement investments. It says to me that as we build out the system and we see areas clearly that might need to be evaluated because they are displacing people, facilities, or whatever, that we would look for both public and private investments. I don't see, I can see situations where a developer from the private sector would come forward and be willing to do something, but would need some assistance. And to have our program structured in such a way that there are some dollars we can come forward with, I think can help to influence that. So
that includes
I'm not sure I understand, Bill, why you don't like the word investments.
Oh, I do like the word, Mayor. It's simply that the way it leads, it implies that we will always use investment. And again, there simply may be some other tools available that accomplish the purpose without putting money on the table.
Yeah. I think we've got a simple solution, and I won't bore you all with all of the wordsmithing, but if we were to restructure this so that it was creating an anti-displacement program that includes investments, strategies, policies, and partnerships with the intent of increasing affordable housing financing tools and other anti-displacement strategies along our transit corridors, that might address what we're talking about.
Okay.
Mayor, is that strong enough for you?
I think I can make that work if I were managing that, yes. I can make that work.
I absolutely agree with you. We need to put our wallet on the table. I just don't want it only to be our wallet.
I agree with you on that too. Let's see, William had a comment.
Yes, I like the wording. I'm glad is being inserted here. I do think investments signals that people are putting their money where their mouth is. So I do like that, even though it might sound like it, to some it may seem they were only utilizing money. I think investments come in the form of money, but can also come in other resources and collaborative efforts. But I'm also looking at the displacement along our transit corridors. So oftentimes from an affordable housing standpoint, in Charlotte specifically, there is this not in my backyard mentality. And I would like to see something that suggests that like all our transit corridors, because what we know is that displacement can happen anywhere. So I would like to see it more specific to all of the corridors and not just one, like for instance, the Gold Line. because Goal Line will come and everybody will say, hey, we got to stop gentrification along Batesville Road, but they won't consider other places that could be displacement areas as well. And then there's only one place, one section of town that's getting this emphasis of affordable housing. And so I would like to see more language to suggest that we're going to have that emphasis everywhere so that we don't get into the not in my backyard situation with this.
William, is your point that we don't need to isolate these efforts to our transit corridors? That we could just be more universal in the application of the strategy?
Well, we could. I mean, we do. Some folks have, asserted that investment in transit will, ultimately equate to or potentially equate to gentrification in areas and displacement. And that's why we've got number 2 here. So I don't necessarily think that you have to take it out altogether. All we want to do, all I think that needs to make sure happens is that we don't get into a scenario whereby we have well, I don't want it on in my backyard, so we're going to fight against it, put it over there. And I think that we just need to be able to distribute it equally amongst our corridors in general and specifically to this effort.
Understood. Thank you.
William, I appreciate that point of view, and I was trying to think of what we've already got built in that makes sure that happens. First of all, we have a comprehensive plan that is going to, in fact, set land use patterns that relate to this transformational mobility network. And what that does is it ensures that certain land uses will continue to occur in the locations we want them to occur in, and that housing or other facilities will not be, in fact, limited to one particular income group. That's a programmatic issue that the city deals with. Although I appreciate your bringing that point up.
Let's see.
Aaron, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Your Honor. I know that the term anti-displacement is used quite often when discussing transportation and infrastructure programs. I think it comes across as very negative and could be distorted. My preference is we would use a different terminology, even if that's displacement mitigation, because I don't know that we can be fully anti-displacement. If that's the signal we're sending, then you can't build infrastructure in a city of this size that's developed to the extent that it is. To me, we're working on either mitigating or supporting in some way. It's not necessarily anti-displacement.
I think one of the things we all would admit is that we're probably not equipped to answer and have the right strategy for this. We are a mobility task force. If we were to assemble an affordable housing task force, we might have even more bandwidth. There's definitely a multitude of directions you could go with the program. I think what we need to do as a part of this effort is to articulate what the intent is, and then hold ourselves accountable for developing the program. But let's turn those types of processes over to folks that are in the know about the most effective tools and methods, and allow them to be sensitive to the methods that are deemed to be most appropriate. Because I hear you loud and clear, and I also hear some communities where I heard the term mitigation, that gets translated to relocation. And so we got to be really careful about because words have meaning to different folks. And so I want to be sure that we don't get so prescriptive that we don't allow someone else to do something great on our behalf.
Why can't we just say create a program that discusses these or looks into issues of displacement, relocation, affordable housing, that sort of thing? I don't think we have to say create an anti-displacement program.
Why can't we, I got whispered by Ty, that says in the comprehensive plan, we use the term displacement mitigation.
And that was my recommendation.
Then that might be something we want to consider.
If it's in the
Because if you
comprehensive
use
plan, I can get on board
anti-displacement,
with it. Yeah.
You're
Why don't
going,
why don't we use that? Displacement mitigation. Would that help?
yes,
That's great.
All right.
That's good. Any
Let me hear from the next person. Do we have another one?
No.
All right, let's move on.
Actually, Your Honor, this is Pedro Perez. I did have a comment that I wanted to make, which is, as some of us might recall, President Johnson created a program called the War on Poverty. And he tried to get that funded, got it funded. And of course, a different war came along and all those funding was displaced towards that, to use the word displacement. And so my concern is that while we're saying we're going to create a program and invest in and hold funds towards this anti-displacement program, that if we don't build firewalls to protect that money will be diverted to other causes. And therefore we'll have this empty promise that we can't fulfill. So that's one of my concerns, is that if we're going to commit to doing this from the perspective of being accountable, then we have to create mechanisms that protect that money so that it's used specifically for this purpose of ensuring that the community don't get destroyed and that the families remain in place and are helped and are not displaced. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro.
Folks, I
Bill?
would really I'd like to push back on the term mitigation a little bit. Someone else mentioned this, but mitigation in our past has included moving people away and helping them in their new location with some rent, maybe. But the point of this is to keep people in an area where we are creating a rich transportation environment that allows them to move around. It's not to mitigate their move. So I'm worried about that word.
Well, guys, don't get too hung up on it, because I think the direction we're trying to go in, really, we saw something in Austin that they did a few weeks ago that they built in that we really hadn't thought about, but it really made a lot of sense that we have some way to look at people who are in a situation where the network, the facility, whatever it is we're building, creates a situation where we don't have funds to support a positive outcome for those who might be displaced. I don't want to use the word positive outcome. These funds would be used. Now, as a task force, we certainly can, in the time we've got, develop all of the, what do they say, the write-up of the bill to make it work in such a way that we can ensure against not moving people 10 miles out, which would be a go against what we're trying to do. But what we want to do is make sure that there are some opportunities by which we deal with it, much as Austin is trying to do. And we hope they're going to be successful at it.
We've got, maybe if we could take one last swing at this language, because I do feel like it's important, and I like that there's a diversity of thoughts on how to approach it. But Ty, I'm gonna give you credit for this. This seems so simple. Develop a program that protects people against displacement and promotes affordability. At the end of the day, that's just using plain words to describe what we mean.
Affordable housing.
But protecting people against displacement, the program's intent. Let's describe the intent of the program rather than putting a name on the program, I guess is the point there.
Yeah, and I think I think the first reaction we all had, I think all members of the task force had, was this actually makes a lot of sense to have this built in. To know that we don't see the sad story of displacements that we saw 25 years ago in Charlotte, when in fact the new highway went through and communities were entirely destroyed, just entirely destroyed. That we are sensitive to that, we're aware of that, and we're willing to fund that as a part of this funding of the overall network. I have Kiba, then I have Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to comment that, but I believe Stephen Solve just now kind of addressed my concern. But I was initially going to push back against the notion that we soften that language. Just because the comprehensive plan uses the word mitigation doesn't mean that we have to use it here. And that, I know, might sound funny coming from me, but the comprehensive plan had thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces and points of contact from public. We are a body of 25, and the mayor specifically assigned us to this body to make sure it's what we want represented. And but again, I think that Stephen's wordsmithing there just kind of addressed, as long as you're describing the intent, we don't need to name it. So thank you.
Thank you, Kiba. Aaron?
Yeah, that was my first suggestion. Is I don't see why we're even talking about a name. If we are going to name it, though, it shouldn't have a negative, like, anti-displacement. There's no reason we can't just say create a program that addresses these concerns.
I think the message has gotten through to the wordsmithers.
Got it.
All right, Stephen, go ahead and continue.
Great. So this last recommendation clearly is where the greatest strength comes from advancing a program. And it largely, in the draft version, said commit the resources necessary to achieve the vision, and had a number of supporting actions underneath it. And as we've continued our dialogue tonight, you can see where we've extracted some of the things that were in the original draft and placed them in other places so that we could be responsive to what many of you said, which was we need to be deliberate about this third recommendation, and we need to be more specific than what we proposed. And so the revised language that you'll see on screen here suggests commit the resources to achieve the vision. The task force proposes a clear and straightforward single source funding strategy for the mobility investment program that considers the city and county's growth over 30 years and fully funds implementation within a 10-year period, financed over a 30-year timeframe. The task force understands that details of the financing will be worked out in financial planning, which considers other city priorities during the program timeframe. Therefore, the task force recommends, and we've just loosely coined this, 1 cent for mobility, where one, a 1 cent sales tax for mobility projects, transit and non-transit, you made that distinction during past meetings, that excludes things like groceries and medication, which is the way it's currently done, so that we reduce the regressive nature of the tax, would be used to fund the local portion of the mobility investment program with necessary state legislative authorization and Mecklenburg County voter approval, a 1 cent for mobility referendum. I'm going to follow this up. This is important. One of the things that we've learned through this process is that it's easy to write that statement, but it's harder to execute. There's a lot of things that we simply will need to trust happen because there's a lot of other variables that have to be considered before a financing and funding plan can be established. And so we've worked with Kelly through this process to better understand the difference between a funding strategy, which is what we're responsible for, and ultimately the creation of that financing and funding plan, which has to consider all aspects of city finance and fiscal responsibility. And so we've somewhat created a fallback here, which is to say that if there's anything about number one, recommendation number one, that is problematic, that we have a backup. And so number two reads, and if needed, to augment the 1 cent sales tax, a significant one-time City of Charlotte capital investment program bond for mobility would be used to append that. And then lastly, in order to make all of this possible, number three, committing to a 1 cent for mobility referendum in the fall of 2021, essentially establishing a time frame with which to target. So I just put a lot on the table, I know, and maybe we can take these one at a time and contemplate first and foremost the benefits of a straightforward single source approach, being the 1 cent for mobility.
I want, before I hear from the task force, I want to hear from our finance guru here. Let me just confirm, I think it's back in the body of the report anyway, that 1 cent over 30 years raises 6.6 billion. Am I wrong or right about that?
That's correct. Using most recent assumptions and collection rates of 110 for the half cent that we saw in 2019 would generate 220 million annually times 30 years would be 6.6 billion. And I would just add that is assuming no growth. And as we know, with the existing half cent sales tax, we saw about a 3.7% annual average growth rate. So we could expect that 6.6 number would be substantially larger if growth was the same for the same period of time.
All right. And the other question was the 1 cent, the capital investment program, which would be funded similarly to what we have right now. Is that correct?
That's correct. Currently, every other year, the city goes to the voters and asks for approval to fund capital improvement bonds that are backed by property taxes.
And the reason we are suggesting number 2, task force, is that in the event that you're unable to get a 1 cent for mobility, it might end up being 50 cents or half cent. You're going to need more money, and this might be another way to get it where the city of Charlotte controls. All right. Okay, let's hear from the task force. I got Carl first and then Betty.
I had a question on the last slide, but on this one, I'm trying to understand the 1 cent sales tax. Sounds a whole lot like the Pennies for Progress out of York County, where they're funding a lot of the road projects that way, and it passes easily. I think the way this seems to work well in other places is the people have a voice in where that money gets spent on which projects. And so I'm rambling a little bit because I think the 1 cent sales tax kind of generates the type of revenue that we need versus other ways of doing it. And I think we do need to be in the multiple billions of dollar range. So I think this does do that. And so I like the focus on this. I just think it needs to be clear where that money is going to go for which projects, which might be inferred in that statement. It just says that the money will be generated, but it doesn't say how it's going to be allocated to which parts of the town and what group or what oversight group actually sees where that money is going to be spent and which priority takes place. And I think that's where York County did a super job. Everybody buys into that so much money is going to be generated for these number of projects. No more money will be raised until those are done. So that's really my comment on that one liner there is we just need to be really clear and transparent on where that money is going to be spent if you're going to ask voters to actually vote for it.
It's an excellent point, an excellent point. And that's part of this accountability thing that we think is very important here. But let me go ahead and hear from other members. What do you Betty?
Mayor, thank you. Question I had was we had talked about that the property tax would be a source of funding. And I think you get there with number 2, but it isn't clear to me that, you know, in this that we are clearly saying that property taxes would be used, because there are several parts of the plan that are very, very appropriate for property taxes to be used for, you know, right of way, greenways, bikes, bike path, mobility, others. And I may be missing it, maybe on the next slide, but just wanted to see where the property tax financing is.
Okay. Want to answer that?
Well, yeah, I think one of the benefits of our conversation from the, try that again. One of the benefits of our conversation from our prior meetings was this observation that we might not want to have a limitation on what the sales tax could be spent on. Historically, it's been a transit sales tax. And once there was the idea of creating a mobility sales tax, that broadens our ability to distribute funds across the variety of needs with which are represented in the Transformational Mobility Network. Once that idea was put forward, it really began to simplify a lot of things for us. Plainly stated, it's a lot easier to get support for one funding stream than it is multiple funding streams. The other aspect of this is if we talk to folks in the finance world, they like having a dedicated singular source of revenue associated with debt retirement, and rather than thinking about the variability associated with multiple. And so to that end, it created an opportunity for us to contemplate a single source approach, which quite frankly, we didn't start with. And so to the extent that that can work for us, and if our math is correct, if we were to get support for that, it has the potential to cover our local portion. Now, the variables with which we might find ourselves not garnering the full 1 cent could be a variety of things. It could be, as we've heard in the past, that when the detailed financing plan is put together, that there's the competition for resources is so great that we realize that we can't put out of kilter our debt to the point where we jeopardize our bond ratings. And so we've been listening and learning about the sensitivity to that, in which case we would want to calibrate what level of taxation we might try to achieve through the sales tax. The other aspect of this is we still need authorization from the legislature. And so if it's not something that we get full support on a 1 cent, maybe it's 3/4 of a cent or it's a 1/2 cent. And so we need to be prepared and have a backup plan in place for those things to occur. And this does neatly offer us the ability to do that, but do so in a way that it's structured as an if-then statement. If we're unsuccessful with the full cent for whatever reason, that we have a mechanism with which we look to support the delta of whatever is short through a one-time CIP, which has been demonstrated to be very successful here in Charlotte and is a fairly efficient instrument for achieving that goal.
All right, we have Bill, then Eric, then William.
First question is pretty simple, I think. I presume this 1 cent is in addition to the current 1/2 cent transit.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. The second is that I do believe that some dedication of property tax revenue to the investment program is going to be necessary, both from a fiscal standpoint, but also from a political standpoint. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of trying to speculate how we get support for this, but the program as it is existing today is, with the exception, I think, of the light rail, solely contained to the city of Charlotte. And so asking all of the residents of Mecklenburg County to pay for a program that, well, other than the red line, excuse me, the red line as well. So it feels as though it may be necessary to ask for some additional property tax funding to make this work.
Bill, I'm not sure I understand. If in fact you get the 1 cent and it's approved, why do you think it's necessary then to look to the property tax?
I think it's a governance issue, Mayor, of who gets to say how that 1 cent is used.
Oh, I thought the 1 cent was going to be based on some plans that were developed and publicly approved by the council.
Well, right now, the governance of the 1/2 cent sales tax is through the Metropolitan Transit Commission. And so someone is going to have to craft a governance structure for this 1 cent countywide sales tax.
I agree. I assume that's a little bit above our pay grade.
Yeah, correct.
The task
Absolutely.
force. But Kelly,
Can I just clarify on option number 2, the capital investment program bond? That would require a property tax increase to be implemented.
That is what I thought. So I think somewhere we would do well for us if we put in here that it includes the property tax. I think there's some need to show that the body, that the council is using the resources they have available, not just legislative approval.
y'all lost me on that one. But
because number 2 is where some property tax.
Yeah, a simple phrase that might just say as financially supported by local property tax, I think addresses that concern.
okay, all right, I got it.
I don't know if you want to add and voter referendum, because you need voter approval on that.
Sure.
Well, you don't have to have a referendum for the property tax.
Not for the property tax, but to issue the bond, you need approval.
Yeah, okay. Like we're currently doing. All right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Eric?
Yep, mine comments related, I'll start off with those that relate to this because I'm just concerned that, if two things. One, if we don't get the 1 cent approved, then we'll probably have both of these then on the referendum for 2021. If we do get the 1 cent, and then we would not need to do number 2, correct? At least the way that it's worded. But then if some point in the future, because it's only $6.6 billion, I don't think it's going to cover everything without that cushion, since I feel like there might be lacking a solid buffer there that we would have to then, I would imagine, enact number 2 at some other point in the future, right? If we needed to have some flexibility, unless everybody is 100% certain that 1 cent will carry us for the next 30 years. I don't know. With not seeing the numbers and like Kelly knowing all of this, to me, it puts a little pit in my stomach that we would have to end up going maybe back at some point in the future beyond 2021 and then having to ask for that additional either property or CIP, whatever way that we're going before the voters again. And that's the thing I wouldn't want to recommend it. I know Austin did theirs where they did a property tax, but they also did Prop B, which was a bond in that same referendum that took care of the non-transit items too. So it might be worth choosing whether it's a CIP or the property tax, and that is also the buffer that is included in 2021. Just my thoughts on that.
Eric, just a real quick response to that. Austin didn't have the benefit of going through a task force process, intimately familiar with the folks there. So just to be clear with everyone, the buck doesn't stop here, right? We have to trust that a more detailed financing plan is the logical next step. What we're making is the recommendation for action to develop that financial plan. And it is in that part of the process with which those funding levels are determined, and also the public policy to determine what we want to ask both of the legislature as well as the voters. So I think I just want to be sure that the task force understands that we didn't pass the buck on number 2 as a bullet point. We literally intentionally left it in there as a dynamic statement to respond to a multitude of circumstances that we may encounter in the near future, so that the recommendation recognizes that we don't control all the variables, And let's let the finance folks kind of work with council to determine the appropriateness of how we proceed, both in terms of the right ratio, what tools and mechanisms are best in place. I hope that helps.
Maybe I can also.
Yes, I mean, that,
Go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say that does clear it up. I just wanted that to be, maybe make aware for myself and everybody else on the task force that, you know, that could end up looking similar to like that Austin combination once that more detailed financial plan and the approval from the state all works out, that there's different combinations here that could happen, which of course is what I recommended last time, is to present recommended options. This wording allows for that flexibility. So that's good. The only other point I had is I just want to make is very important to, and it may come up in the additional recommendations, or if you added a fourth option here, but just the word accountability. And I think, especially for my conservative friends, having that in there and then it being removed is very important to have that accountability or that oversight board or whatever. I just want to express that I think that's key to buy-in.
I think we have to.
Yeah, I think we talk about
Yeah,
accountability.
we did. Yes. So, but what I think
Agreement.
Eric is saying is that we need to include that as part of here so that there is an accountability, you know. But what I wanted to bring up quickly is Austin is a great model and we reference that all the time, but something we need to be mindful of is that Austin was property tax in perpetuity. There was no sales tax. It was both propositions were property tax in perpetuity. And that's not necessarily something that people have appetite for, that based on what we know now. So while Austin is a great example, it's important to know that we may not have the same in terms of increasing property taxes in perpetuity. We don't know. We haven't tested it yet. What we've tested so far in some polling that we've done is that there seems to be more inclination of residents towards sales tax than property tax, especially residents polled within Mecklenburg County. So something to keep in mind, which is why that number 2 is very important, because we're already doing it. All we're asking for is to have a one-time significant infusion and then go back to a steady state. And that's another thing that will be worked out in a detailed financial plan.
I have, let's see, William?
Yes, I'd just like to piggyback off Carl's earlier comment in regards to greater specificity and prioritization of some of the projects, and some of the emails and feedback that I've received. I fall right in line to, people wanting to understand where those priorities lie. And I think it would bode well for transparency and greater buy-in as well. So that was my comment.
Thank you, William. That is an issue that the council will have to take up when they talk about managing, going before the public. Accountability, dashboards structured to get people to understand what it is and when they're going to expect certain of the improvements and where those improvements are going to be, so forth and so on. Let me go on to Ken.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my concern with number 2 is the terminology one time. Because once a property tax, assuming you do it through referendum because it's going to be through a CIP, that property tax would be ongoing for the 30 years and would be on top of any other property tax that they can do without referendum. So to use the terminology one time implies to me that it's sort of a one-time tax. It is not. It's a one-time CIP supported by ongoing increases in the property taxes, and it's non-specific. So if we're making a recommendation, I think it ought to be specific in terms of the numbers. And it shouldn't say one time, because the implication is one-time tax. And we know property taxes are ad infinitum once enacted.
Can you all explain how that really would work? I think there is some confusion on this. Kelly?
Yeah, I'm trying to see what Ed has drafted. So it would be a one-time bond that, you're correct, would be supported with property taxes until that debt was retired. I think we can wordsmith that pretty easily. Right, Ed?
So it's a one-time bond that we put before the community.
Mhm.
If it's $1 billion,
Go.
if it's $500 million,
Thank you.
it
Whatever.
has a certain impact on the tax rate.
Mhm.
Yeah, whatever number it is that
Past-
we're looking for a bond, we ought to put down what tax, how many cents of tax that will require yearly for the 30-year period.
But
Is
see,
it 1 cent? Is it 2 cent?
I think that the challenge with that goes back to where we are in the process and working with the partners at the state and the federal level, particularly the federal level, not knowing the level of commitment to infrastructure from the new administration at this point. So if we had the luxury of time, I think we could be able to do that, but I don't know how we could do that at this point.
in other words, we don't know what the response is going to be
Yeah.
on the sales tax, number one. And based on what that likely is going to be, even from the federal government,
Yeah, it's all gonna flow
then
down.
the city would be in a position that they would have to take a look. And what we were recommending here is that you take a look at a one-time, whatever that injection might need to be to fund this thing. That's what it would be.
Yeah.
So we can't say at this time
Yeah.
what the size of that bond referendum ought to be, and hence what the impact on the property tax rate is going to be.
Correct. Yeah,
Right?
I hope the
Or
number
if you
zero.
need it.
Yeah.
Let me make a comment that Geraldine's next up, but I do want to make a comment. I've heard now from a couple of the task force members that there is a lack of confidence that the size of this program is not going to be 12 billion. That's the upper end of the range. And I'm maybe a little surprised about that because I thought the reverse might be the case. The fact is that we're talking about $6 billion being raised on a 1 cent for mobility sales tax. And that $6 billion has not built in growth rates, which have historically been about 3%, 3.5%.
3.5. I was actually just playing with my
So if
calculator
you
over
built
here.
that in,
So in the
you
first
are
5
likely
years.
going to be, which is why I think the 1 cent makes sense rather than a suggestion of a 0.5 cent, because I think you will be more than sufficiently able to fund this across the county with a 1 cent sales tax.
So just in the first year, assuming the 220 million a year, by year 5, and again, I just did this back of my piece of paper here, that 220 becomes 248. And that's in 5 years. And so by the time you're in year 30, that number is north of $500 million every year. So when I say it doesn't include growth, don't take that lightly. That number has meaning.
Let's go to Geraldine.
So sorry, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. First, I love the bold stance that we have here, and the idea of 1 cent for mobility. I think it's important. I mean, this was the whole reason the task force was put together, is to kind of think big. And I think if the 1 cent sales tax was specifically designated to transit, there would be a lot of support across the county and the city to kind of take that plunge and to generate that revenue. What I urge the task force to think about is we've had the benefit of going through this process and thinking very thoughtfully and carefully about a better mobility future for the people of Charlotte. That was the task of the task force. Our colleagues and peers in the county, in towns across the county, have not undertaken a similar process. And there might be other non-transit mobility needs in the same types of buckets that we've been talking about for the last 9 months that are important to their community, that address equity, that address all the things that we've been talking about. And so my concern is by framing it as transit and non-transit, we're opening up a broader, important conversation about the needs in those other communities. And I think it's only fair that if the sales tax is going to be levied countywide, that we kind of go in eyes open, that those communities might have other needs for non-transit mobility investments that we haven't even conceived of in this process. So I feel like the language of number one needs to say very boldly, at a minimum, it's 1 cent for transit, because that 2030 plan needs to be funded. And then maybe the part B is that we work towards, you know, maybe it's a 0.5 cent for non-mobility. I just worry that, you know, there will be people in the county that say, well, I'm interested in this for my community. I was not part of this process. And now my sales tax is increasing because of a vision that Charlotte has. And I just would like us to be sensitive to the political dynamics of that, and then think about how we can word our recommendations to be bold, but also give the flexibility for things to evolve. As Stephen points out, there's much more detailed planning that's to follow, and all of that could be completely hashed out. And I have full confidence in the city and the mayor and all the people who are going to work on this to lay out those details. I just don't want us to fall into the trap of not thinking about that as we're crafting these recommendations. So sorry to ramble, but I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration and see what y'all think.
Geraldine, just real quick. I mean, I appreciate those observations. I think all of us were trying to ensure that we learned from the work of others and the path of other communities. And if we harken back to the peer cities and the guests that we had invited to this process, they made clear to us that one of the things that is incredibly helpful is to ensure that everyone sees that there's something in it for them. How does it affect their daily lives? How does it affect the environment with which they've chosen to invest their lives? And I think one of the reasons why that number one specifically remains as a transit and non-transit is because the math supports right now, currently our best estimates are the math supports our local portion through the single source. And so we don't need to distinguish. And the other aspect is to ensure that whatever we're putting out there publicly is sending a positive message, quite frankly, that this isn't just about a single mode. This isn't helping just a single constituency or a particular cohort. It is a diversity of investments in a system that aligns with a variety of initiatives. And so I think we're hesitant to isolate the investment into a singular mode, but I just wanted to explain why we crafted it the way that we crafted, and of course respond to anyone else in the task force that might feel contrary to that.
Yeah, and I fully appreciate that. And I think, you know, from a non-political perspective, that makes total sense. I just think that, you know, if you look simply at the visuals on the report and you look at the concentration of where the recommendations are visually on those maps, the vast majority of what's happening is happening in Charlotte, as it should be. That's the purpose of this task force. So the things that sort of spine out into the region or into the county, the bike network and some of the high-speed bus and transit, I question whether or not the communities in North Muhlenberg, for example, would say, well, of course we have traffic intersections that we would like to enhance. And I would just want to make sure that a 1 cent for mobility for the county is going to be enough to meet the needs and expectations of voters. That's all my point is.
Okay, thank you, Geraldine. It's a good point. Of course, I do think that the people in the northern part of the county would like to see that red line come up into that area for what it would do. But you do have a point. Do we have money from the 1 cent sales tax to assist those areas in sidewalk construction and other kinds of plans that they may be making? I thought our interest was, in fact, to fund the transformational mobility network that seems to have touched every populous part of the county, including all the 6 towns. And that would be in non-transit projects like bicycles, sidewalks. One might argue that the sidewalks appear from the map to be all Charlotte and not Davidson or not some of the other areas. And that may be true. That's a refinement that we may need to look at. How we allocate the dollars for that might be something that another body, not ours, might look at once they're here. But I hope, and this is the hope of the chairman, that we don't make it 1 cent for transit only. I think one of you made that suggestion of a cent, that it ought to be a mobility tax. And the more I think of it, that is exactly what Geraldine and I think it should be. We may need to work out how we work with the other parts of the county to get their support and to ensure that they're getting their fair share. Are there other speakers to this point? Is that it? Any other task force members who want to speak up on this? This is, of course, all of the other recommendations are important, but this is a big one. Well, we'll come back then and at the end of the public comment section to allow you to make your final comments on it and what might be. I'm going to turn it over to Ty now to hear some of the comments that are coming in, both in real time and some that came in earlier.
Thank you, sir. So there are a few comments here. One from Mr. Ron Ross. Creating a displacement program should include displacement of businesses, not just residential, due to gentrification, resulting in a negative impact on existing communities, such as those along Bettisford Road. The second comment from him is commit resources. There's need for transparency of funds usage for projects to community. I agree with multiple options being recommended for funding sources. The third comment from Mr. Mark Laughlin. MEC Playbook will also be asking for funding. MEC Playbook, for those of us who may not know, is the work that the county is doing for the Greenway program. That work is part of what we've considered in this network. What the MEC Playbook will be recommending or putting forward is part of the consideration in the Transformation and Mobility Network. Ms. Sonia Smith, one of the task force members, had to drop off at 7, but she sent an email saying, I support document as written, and I will support the team's decision. Then we also have a statement from the Business Alliance. Thank you, Janet. This came from the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. We have taken great care to consider the needs of our region and its communities, both now and for the future. Investing in the city and our region's infrastructure will help our businesses in moving people and products. It will address the critical need to improve economic mobility for residents in our community. This Transformation and Mobility Network reflects a comprehensive, data-driven, and thoughtful approach. These recommendations have tremendous potential to continue building our region's profile as a world-class market for future business and a leader in equitable economic growth. The Charlotte Regional Business Alliance supports the work of this dedicated group and support Council adopting these findings. Thank you. And finally, from Mr. David Baringer Smith. Former Mayor Gant is a great man and has always had the best intent in this city. However, this task force has uncompletely unrealistic expectations, and money doesn't grow on trees. Even with tax increases as prior discussed, it will not be financially responsible to put up $10 billion this fast into transportation, even though we absolutely do need to make serious investments into transportation. I hope these leaders don't do more damage by aiming too high and endangering the financial health of this great city. Thank you, Mr. Smith. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the fine comments from Mr. Smith. We disagree on maybe a few points, but appreciate his willingness to listen in and to offer his views, and from the other citizens who did the same.
So, Mayor Gant, one of the things that we know is difficult is wrapping things up. And I hope that the task force can see the influence of their participation. We've tried to take great care and to demonstrate that we're listening and to develop a report that reflects the dialogue that we've had together, the journey that we've been on. And I know that for some, there might be some desire for something more formal, but we're contemplating a reflection point at the end here. And I was just curious if there's a method with which folks might be able to express their degree of support for what I think are fairly benign statements. And we put these together not as a motion, not a formal action, but simply as a summary of thoughts that capture a lot of what we're here to accomplish. And so with your permission, I'm just going to read through it really quickly, and maybe we can elicit some words of wisdom and some closing remarks from task force members. As a member of the Charlotte Moves Task Force, I'm supportive of improving affordability, equity, and access to opportunity, supporting our economic competitiveness, protecting our environment and quality of life, integrating initiatives to maximize benefits. And we believe that that may be possible through the implementation of a transformational mobility network, and encourage the pursuit of ways to fund and finance its construction.
Stephen, looks like apple pie motherhood and whatever else we want to say. Yes, I really would like to hear from the task force. Does anybody have any issue with those 4 bullet points up there? Because what I'm trying to do, folks, is I don't want this to get into I make a motion that we do X, Y, and Z, and then we take a vote of everybody on all of those points. But I thought over the 10 meetings that we held that these 4 points came to the fore and made sense for all of us. Do I hear anyone who has some problem with the wording of any of those 4, or who cannot be fully supportive of what's being shown here? Don't all speak at once, but.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
David Ward, I do not have a concern at all with the wording of these 4 points. In fact, I agree with them wholeheartedly. I guess my question is around what does my support of these 4 points entail? Does it convey support for a proposal, which, we've seen tonight some new things included in this that, frankly, I think are great ideas, but may mean you may require a little more discussion around the edges and around the funding.
Well, I think I'm going to give you a chance to do that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Great. No, please.
I want to get out of the way those basic overall elements that I believe we're all in support of. I believe that, and you said that, and I appreciate that.
2 thumbs up.
Are there others who might object to just the 4 bullet points we've got up on the screen?
In generally, I think this is a nice place, quite frankly, to express support for this as a strategy. I mean, we don't have a requirement that we're operating like Robert's rules, but generally speaking, we know, I think, that most folks are going to resoundingly say that they came into this with support for those 4 ideals, if you will, and they're consistent with the comprehensive plan, I might add. I think that one of the things we're asking folks at this point in time is just closing remarks and support for the process and the idea of generating a response to our changing and increasing needs through some form of transformational mobility network investment. And we can always debate about the exactness of how we execute that. I believe we all know that we have to trust the wisdom and guidance of council to make ultimate decisions on that specific financing plan. But with this is our hope that we might hear a little bit of closing remarks from folks to ensure that they still feel good about us moving forward with this recommendation and the form with which it's about to take through the report that's been generated.
All right, I think I shared with you as we started this meeting that I really wanted to hear from all members of the task force, whether you do it in 30 seconds or whether you take 3 or 4 minutes to do it. So who wants to start? And I'm gonna, let's see, I think we've got, I'll start with Aaron Lay. Aaron?
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, pulling back up. I fully support and am good with this statement and would vote for approval.
All of the recommendations that have been.
Yes, Your Honor.
Funding included?
Funding included. Can't do the other recommendations without the funding, right?
All right. We'll go to Betty Doster.
Mayor, thank you. And I absolutely agree with all of these statements. And I think several meetings ago, I had an aha moment when we figured that we could accomplish that master plan, the transportation mobility network, over 10 years, and that it was very doable, and it used sources of revenue that we have and plans that we already have. My only concern, and I've heard a little bit of this, but I'm not sure we resolved it, is, and I think it may have been a little bit of a new nuance and new info tonight, was whether the funding to mitigate, or however, whatever word we've come up with about gentrification and displacement, that would be funded through this plan. And I think that was news, and I just would want to have a better, want to be have some more clarity about that. That does not preclude me from supporting this, but I'm just have some lack of clarity around that, because I think that could be a big number. And I don't think we had talked about that issue being funded through this. So I also will say that one of the things that I'm most excited about the plan is that we kept talking a lot about connectivity and last mile, first mile, because without that, these systems don't work. So,
okay, Betty, did I hear you say that you had some problems with this discussion regarding displacement, investment?
No, I don't have a problem with it. I just didn't know that we were, is the funding to mitigate displacement, that's going to come out of the 8 to 12 billion. And that's what I was just trying to, if it is, then I just wanted some clarification about that. If it's not, then 8 to 12 billion is not the right number then.
Just to be clear, the intent is to include it with the program. That's the recommendation. It's not policy. These are just recommendations to council, but the intent would be to seek ways to accomplish them in an integrated way.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Betty.
Thank you.
Thanks for your participation. Bill Cox?
To respond to to Betty's point in that last statement, it's going to be, I think, a little bit difficult to craft enabling legislation that allows a new transportation tax to also deal with this issue, which I'm supportive of that. I just think that's going to be difficult to craft the language. I think, I'm very supportive of the way that the program has moved, the way the report has moved, and I appreciate these statements and fully support these statements. To Geraldine's point, we are opening the door, as we should, to the use of these dollars elsewhere in the county for programs and projects that we have not heretofore discussed. And so, as I said earlier, the governance of this money is going to be a crucial question above our pay grade, as you said, Mayor. But the creation of the MTC is an example of how you might go about governing. So that issue is going to be crucial.
Can't hear anything. Is anybody on?
Can't hear anything either.
I was just going to type that in the chat, so.
Looks like they're stalled on their end.
It does. It does.
All right, that's it, guys. The meeting is over with.
I didn't think I could shut off debate that way.
Bill, is that a mic drop?
Sorry,
Bill?
Danielle, I'm sorry. I'm the problem.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, we've talked about this for the last 10 months in many conversations, but, you know, one of the top, if not number one challenges from a workforce perspective that our job seekers is facing is transportation, and whether it's access or whether it's timely transportation. And many argue that we've got a skills gap, and I agree with that, but I also believe that it's heavily impacted by an opportunity gap. And I think that this plan and the work that we've done over the last several months does address this. And this was my main concern about creating accessibility and being inclusive with how we do that, and as well as being equitable. And so I am in support of the plan. I think that there's been some great work over the last several months. Thank you to Taiwo and to team for all the work that has been put into this. And I'm in full support of the recommendations and these 4 key areas as well. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Danielle. David Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, could not be more supportive of these 4 points and of the overall goal and the components of this plan. I think there is a lot of good in here, and I think our city will look markedly different in a good way if a lot of the stuff that we've been discussing is enacted. I do have some concerns, however, around how we get there. And you know, we've discussed tonight in our last meeting some pretty major items that while I agree with their intent, you know, considering them in the context of funding and budget. You know, I'm not sure I have enough information to say that we've given them you know, considerable thought and consternation. However, I really do. I think we have made a lot of progress here. I just think there is, frankly, there's a lot more work to do, and maybe I'm a little naive as to what the next steps are going to be in terms of you know, our elected officials considering this and discussing it, but those are my thoughts, my support, and some of my concerns.
All right, thanks, David. Ilyas.
Yes, Mayor Gant. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. The only thing on the second slide where we spoke about anti-displacement, one suggestion is instead of creating if you use term develop or build, I wrote it in the comments or chat. That's the only thing. And we keep the anti-displacement word specifically there as is. And apart from that, everything is good. And I support the task force work and the funding source, what we are suggesting here.
Thank you so much, Ilias. Eric?
Thank you, Mayor. And it's been a pleasure to serve on this task force with all of my members and the mayor and the city staff. And I, contrary to some of my questions earlier, I do fully support, and don't get me wrong, I know that this transformational mobility network needs to occur with the city like Charlotte growing as it is, and it being so heavily dependent upon auto and cars and driving, and we're never going to be able to thrive as a city, mobility or economically, quality of life without taking this initiative. So it's vitally important we do this, and we have to do it as quickly as possible. So I fully support all of the 4 initiatives there and getting this on the ballot for next year. As far as some of my comments, I think because we're all on this task force, smart, educated folks, passionate about this, that we're trying to solve and get all the details right. And I think, we have to step back, that this is a recommendation and that we have to pass this along. It's a framework that has to be robust enough to be able to, have who we hand the baton off to be able to make it work. And the staff of the city and the elected officials, and then all of the other groups involved in the county and the state. So I think it's hard to keep that in mind and in perspective sometimes. But I think it's bold with the using just the sales tax with the flexibility that with the things we don't know right now to make it work. And I think leaving just the wording of transit and expanding it to include all mobility, I think will be a benefit, because I think that will broaden, who this affects and who will benefit. And I know Geraldine's comments makes sense. I think we'll have to leave that to the negotiators and politicians to work out all those details. But I think the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish hopefully will be seen by the other towns and cities in the county, and then of course that will spill out into the surrounding counties that are already wanting and waiting to work with us. So I think this is a great start, and it's a necessity in order for us to thrive in the future. So I look forward to what this brings for the near future and the long term. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Ernie?
I'm fully in support of what we have proposed so far, and I'm hopeful that the city council will be bold in receiving this and taking action in a very quick fashion to get this ball really rolling. I think our Charlotte and our region are at an inflection point. There's a lot of things that have sort of built up to this time. And this is an opportunity for us to really make a difference in the lives of Charlotteans and the whole region. And this is repetitive, but when you look at what Janet's doing at the Regional Business Alliance and what Geraldine's doing in her organization, Charlotte is the engine for this region. And if we lead, the other communities around will benefit from that, and they'll get on board. And there's a lot of details that have to be worked out. But if we don't start doing it, we're going to look back 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now and regret that we didn't do it. So thank you, Taiwo and Mayor Gant and your team for incredible work. It's amazing that you put together all this stuff every week or every month that we meet, and let's get it going. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernie. Geraldine.
Oh, come on. You're going to make me follow that? That was so eloquent. Thank you, Ernie. I agree 100% with what you just said. And I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your leadership, and Taiwo and your team, and Stephen for your great work. And I think the debate and discussions, the spirited debate and discussions that we've had on the task force has only made this outcome, I think, better. And I'm really proud of the work that everyone has done. I fully endorse the 4 bullets that are on the screen. I think the recommendations are great, and I think it really gives a launching pad for the detailed work, the hard work that's going to follow this. I guess my only concluding comments would be just to make sure that in the language and the report that goes out, that we're really hammering home the importance of partnership. I think partnership becomes believable when people see partnership in writing. They see that they're a part of the process. And I think so where we can add more of that language throughout and really show that this is the start of a conversation and not the end of a conversation, and there's much more details to be worked out, I think that will help in how this information is received outside of Charlotte. And then even though, Eric, I never would put myself in the conservative category personally, I do think that accountability language should find its way in there somehow. I do think that's important for our communities. But overall, it was a great process. I enjoyed it. And thank you for letting me participate.
Thanks a lot, Geraldine. And thanks for what you're doing with Connect Beyond and those other programs. Janet Labar. Janet?
Sorry, I'm doing dual muted things here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Well, I always hate following Geraldine, and I was trying to figure out if there was an H or an I in our group here who would have to go between me and Geraldine. But I'll just, I'll echo what everyone else has said, and certainly we provided a public statement already read to the group by Taiwo. I do want to thank you, Mayor, and Taiwo, Stephen, Kelly, all the folks at the city who have done a really great job putting all of this complexity and distilling it into 4 points that it sounds like the majority of us are really supportive of and behind. I'm like Ernie, I think it's a big time, it's a big moment. Our city and our region are going to continue to grow. And if we don't act now for this, I think we'll miss our window and our opportunity. So I appreciate the boldness. There is going to be a ton of heavy lifting and hard work now ahead of us. And, I appreciate that this group has been so fully engaged throughout the last 9 months that we've been meeting. And my plea to the task force is that we continue as citizens and, as business leaders and community leaders in our own right to keep championing this work forward, because it's going to take all of us really to get this off the ground. And I will just put a couple of more exclamation points on things that I heard tonight that I feel like do require more discussion. I love the anti-displacement pieces. I do believe that requires more discussion if that's going to be included in the funding, and would like to see some more thought among elected officials or other community bodies to do that. I also think that the single source of the funding is simple, and I like that. It just means, I think, a heavier lift with our friends in Raleigh and the General Assembly. So there will be some work to do there. But overall, again, thank you so much for leading this. I really enjoyed being part of the process, and I look forward to seeing it through. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Jim?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Gant. I want to thank Mayor Lyles as well for appointing us all to this. It's been really fascinating to kind of see behind the scenes a little bit more of what's going on. I've really appreciated the opportunity to do that. Certainly appreciate the staff and consultants' efforts preparing us, as everybody else has said, so I don't want to echo too much. And Ernie, I think you were spot on with the bold comment. I absolutely support the vision here. I think it's important that we do lead, like Ernie said. I think it's important that as a city we are bold. As I indicated earlier in the call today, I still have some reservations. I'm concerned about the budgeting and funding. We've had some high level cost put in front of us. I think in some cases they've been understated, as I mentioned earlier. And I don't think we've been able to review them at a level of detail that was sufficient to really have a high level of confidence in some of those, at least for me. And then, you know, when I factor in some of the recent under budgeting of things like the cross Charlotte Trail, the Greenway project, that concerns me around some of these figures. So again, I really absolutely support the vision. I'm worried about, are the numbers correct? And the numbers are important to me. I do, as I stated earlier, and a couple other people have stated here today, want to ensure that our adjacent cities, towns, and even counties perhaps are involved in this plan and are supporting it as well. I think we do need to lead, but we also need to know that we've got a team around us that's going to work with us on this, and that's important to me. The comments tonight about anti-displacement, gentrification, I think that's a slippery slope, and we need to be careful about what, as a city, we commit to there. I certainly want to avoid any of the type of transportation programs that happened 70 years ago with the interstate systems that displaced massive numbers of people, and I want to make sure that we're not endorsing or supporting anything like that. At the same time, I think that we need to be realistic and recognize that when we invest in certain corridors, it's going to make those areas more desirable. That's going to raise property values, and the city subsidizing or another other way supporting that indefinitely to avoid gentrification or try to prevent it. I don't think economically in a free market system that's realistic or something that the city can do. So I'm not, I understand the initiative there and I support the concept of it. I think it needs more time to be worked out. So, to me, again, the vision's great. I support it. I like the boldness. There's still some areas that to me need to be buttoned up.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Carl?
Yeah, it's kind of hard going after all that. I think I don't want to regurgitate everything what everybody said, but I just want to commend the work, all the work. It's just been a pleasure to be on the task force. I want to thank the leadership, and I want to thank all the task force members from across this whole region. Everyone's been really positive. Everybody's been really diligent in all their work. So I just want to thank everybody. And I positively support the conclusions and the recommendations of the 4 bullet points. I think it is bold. I think the numbers are going to be low. I mean, we've seen how things have escalated. I've been building trails for a while when we could build a trail for $100,000 a mile. And now the county is saying it's $2.8 million a mile, and it's going to go to $4 or $5 million a mile as we get the harder places. We just know things are going to escalate. And I've looked at like all the other cities, and I'm just so glad that leadership is thinking about an innovative mobility plan for Charlotte, just even thinking about it and putting it out there so that people can start to grasp that we're falling behind other cities. And we're losing value. We're not going to be attracting the top-notch companies if we don't do things like this. And I just think it's going to take a long time. Cities like Portland have been working on their system for 40 years. And what we can get done in 10 is probably not going to be as much as we think we can. There's just going to be hard roadblocks along the way. But with that being said, I support it all. I think people are skeptical of any new government, First of all, they're skeptical of government and any new programs that are going to be putting taxes on them. And I think William and I are, and I think a lot of people are saying, we got to be very transparent about where that money's going to go. What parts of the city, if I'm sitting in one part of the city, am I going to get some of the money that I'm paying more taxes for? And being very transparent about where that money goes, I think is imperative. The last 2 more statements. One is on this displacement. I'm wondering if we could pitch it positively. I think what everybody supports is that Homestead and local communities are stable, that we support stability of these wonderful communities that are there that will not get moved out because of gentrification. So I think what we could do is say we support homestead and local community stability, and however that happens. And so that's one way to spin it so that we don't use some words that will turn people off. And I'm a business guy, I've been around big companies for a long time. There seems like the corporate part, the corporations aren't involved yet. And I think when you look at the top 24, 25 companies in Charlotte, their combined revenue is over $400 or $500 billion a year. And they could fund some of these things like they did in Portland, where a company steps up and builds a section of the line or builds a greenway part or does something. And so I think we could look at corporations that are making a lot of money right now to help us with this, not as well as get them on board. And lastly, I think there's going to be a lot of value created when this happens. And people who complain about their tax values go up are also the same ones that love getting an extra 50% improvement in their tax, in their value when they go to sell. So somewhere along the way, there's a lot of value going to be created that we have to communicate to this community that we're all going to share in this value creation, whether it's on health or on, it's the attracting more people to this area or on when they go to sell their house. So I just think we've done terrific work here. I think the recommendations are great, and I'm just glad to be part of it, and welcome joining any effort going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carl. Kiba?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too have enjoyed engaging with such great minds in the task force. I thank Mayor Viles for putting together this body for this important work. Thank you, Mayor Gant, Tyro, Stephen, for your leadership and guidance and facilitation. I am in complete support of this recommendation. The wording that we see here on the screen, I approve of and am in agreement with. Although this is the last meeting that we will have, is definitely not the end of the work. As Janet has noted, I look forward to hopefully speaking this into existence, the messaging that gets created in support of this transformational work that we're recommending. I look forward to Eric and Team Sustain Charlotte in their launch in the Transportation Coalition next week, and in kind of partnering with that organization to see how we can further support some of the transportation initiatives that the city so desperately needs. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to the further discussion on this body. I look forward to your presentation, Mayor Gant and Taiwo, to City Council on the 14th, and good luck.
Thank you, Kiva. Ken May?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, it's hard not to be repetitive, but I'm really thankful to have been appointed to this team to work with this wonderful group of people. I'm fully supportive of all four of the statements because what's not to love? I like every component of the vision. I would love to see every one of them implemented. Like a few of the other people, I have some concerns about the cost estimate, and I have some concerns about the ability to fund it all at once. And I guess where I thought we might get to during this task force, and I'm not sure we did, was to set priorities as to if we could only fund so much or parts of it, what priorities do we recommend that we fund first? So in my mind, that part was incomplete. And the other part is we've talked about the cost to build, but with every other city, and use Nashville as an example, the operating expense ongoing is considerable. I had some concerns in a couple of meetings where the discussion led to, should this be free for everybody? I think John Lewis told us early on that it was a $25 million a year revenue stream right now, which helps to fund ongoing operations. Once you double the size, when you put in a red line, a gold line, a silver line, maybe that becomes 50 million. So I don't know how you fund operating expense over 30 years without a revenue stream to do that. And I that was left unsaid today, but I know in the last meeting, the move was sort of to recommend, free for all. So from that standpoint, I just think that it's incomplete in terms of how do we recommend to the city that if we can only, we'd love to do every one of these things because they all help make the city great. But we think these are the priorities in terms of greatest needs. And I know we're not going to get to that today, but I think that's what's lacking. So that's the trouble I have with it. But I would love for every one of these things to be done. And you know what? Thanks to everybody on staff for, like everybody has said, it's just been a great experience. And wow, what terrific work you've done. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate your contribution. Nick McJetta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say too, it's been a pleasure working with so many talented staff and task force members. I think this has been a very fruitful process, particularly kind of looking at it. For those that don't know, I currently reside in East Charlotte. I'm out of Grove Park. We're a older neighborhood established in the 1960s, well established. And we're seeing a lot of development within East Charlotte due to increasing land values in other parts of town. East Charlotte has had to absorb a lot of affordable housing. Anyone who's probably been on our side of town will see a lot of new construction going up. We also have improvements going in at the Eastland Mall site. Which will be probably coming online later this decade, I suppose. And looking at what our transportation, existing transportation options are now versus what they'll be in the future through the Transformation Mobility Network, I think is going to be really important for all the new development that's coming online. I think that Transformation Mobility Network is going to be very important to help bring people that may be taking advantage of our affordable housing, taking them to retail opportunities, employment opportunities, opportunities that will create social mobility and upward mobility. And I think it's also very important that we educate citizens in both all of Charlotte and the area of how important this network is from a regional perspective and also in a local perspective to make sure that this is successful. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Pedro?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to be very, very succinct. I agree with everything. I'm honored to be a part of this. And I thank all of the city, the mayor, and Taiwo for the incredible amount of work. And I'm honored to be part of such a tremendous and wonderful task force and committee that is committed to making this city what it wants to be, which is a global, inclusive, and equitable city. So thank you very much. Whatever you need from me, please do not hesitate to call. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Raquel Lynch?
She had to leave, but she sent a message that she supports the network and cost and everything.
All right. Reggie Henderson?
Reggie had to drop off as well, and he sent a message saying the same.
Okay. Sonia?
Sonia had to drop off or send a message of support as well.
Ooh. Stefania?
She on?
Stefania? She's not here? Okay. Tammy Simmons? Because she's not here, is she?
She is.
Tammy, are you here?
I know I saw her.
I'm here, Mayor Gant. Let me just my thanks, as so many have done, to Mayors Gant and Lyles. This has truly been a fascinating process. It's not often that I have at my age an opportunity to learn something totally out of my toolbox. So this has been great, and I appreciate everybody's efforts in putting so much amazing information in front of us and equipping us to be able to support what the committee has done as we are out in the community. I would ask just one thing as I'm looking at the 4 bullets, and I'm totally supportive of all of them and all of the work that we have done. I wonder if we do ourselves a disservice by not adding something like, this is as a member of the Charlotte Moves Task Force, I'm supportive of, but I would love to see us add something that says, as a member of the task force and based upon significant study and investigation of comparative, metrics and looking at our peer cities and something like that. Based upon all of that, I'm supportive of these 4 bullet points because someone said earlier, people want to know that we are doing this work on their behalf and with their best interest in mind. And I know that if I were on the other side of this, I would want to know based upon what can you as a committee person support these things? And I might get behind you. So, maybe if there's a way just to illustrate all of the work that's gone into coming up with these 4 bullet points, that would really reflect, I think, what we've done over these last few months. But totally supportive of what is here and look forward to the work. Like so many others, I have concerns about how it will be funded, but I also have a whole lot of, what is the word? I believe Charlotte will rally and it will get done because we are a competitive city and folks they're gonna get behind it. So.
Thank you, Tammy. William Hughes.
Yes. I'd like to say thank you to Mayor Lyles and to Mayor Gant and to Ty Woe and Stephen. You guys have done an excellent job in leading this conversation, and also to the wonderful people that I've had an opportunity to work with in small and large groups. And I totally agree with the 4 points that have been made and also support the funding mechanism behind it. I think that we've done an incredibly, as a resident, first of all, of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, being from Charlotte and living in the Batesford Road corridor, particularly take interest in the fact that we've looked at this as well as the 2040 plan with an equity lens, especially in areas when we talk about how we move forward, we have to recognize our past mistakes. And when you look at areas like the Batesford Road corridor that's been mangled by highways 16 and 77, et cetera, and we start to move forward, we have to look at this from a holistic approach and how do we make these things right going forward. So I totally appreciate the guidance that you guys have provided, and I hope that we are able to find the appropriate accountability mechanism to make sure that these things come to fruition. I know that there's been some discussion around the cost associated with it, and there always are challenges with cost and construction and building something out. But I am confident that we will take the appropriate approach and look for the appropriate partnerships to make this happen. So I just want to say thank you, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this group.
Thank you, William. I think I've gone down and gotten everybody's comments. And first of all, let me just express for many times how much I appreciate such a smart group of citizens from across this community, bringing so many different perspectives on this issue. I did a little tally here, and of all the people present tonight, everybody is supportive. Everybody is supportive of the work that we've done, and that's pretty good. Now, we've had some disagreement, a little bit on some details, not the least of those being funding to some extent. But even there, I suspect that there are some concerns about whether or not we have got enough to do this. And if we don't have enough, I think one member said, then we should have set a little bit of a priority ranking of what needs to go first. On the other hand, let me just say that I am delighted that we are going to present to council something that is bold and indeed transformational, covering all modes of movement around this community. And I'm delighted that we had the proper perspectives on everything from economic mobility to concerns for how much money people are spending, to how much money we will spend to cause this to happen. I think that we need to be bold, and I think the proposal for the 1 cent for mobility may resonate, hopefully, with council and with the mayor. I think we've got to fund the entire project, or at least give council the opportunity to examine funding the entire project. That's about as far as the task force can go. We've got other folks that will look at how we work with the small towns, how we work with the county, what the priorities of the city are going to be. But I'm comfortable with saying that you have spent a considerable amount of hours looking at this, and you came down with a proposal that suggests that we care about the community, we care about what it is that needs to happen. We know we cannot stand still as a community and be the competitive, thriving place we all want Charlotte to be. We think there is a cost associated with this, but we're using a structure, a method of payment in which the city has already demonstrated great stewardship with over the last 20 years. They took a 1/2 cent sales tax and built the Blue Line and never came back to the community for a dime. I suspect that with a penny, and if that gets funded and the growth that's going to be there, we will be able to fully fund this entire transformational mobility network. At least that's my hope. But the way that's going to happen is you are going to be needed down the road, every one of you, because you know more about this now than the average citizen. And I'm hoping that you will get involved at the appropriate time, with the appropriate committees to help sell this proposition to the community. Not sell it so much as point out that as citizens out there, we all are going to benefit. We are going to benefit from those who are on the lowest end of the economic ladder to those who are at the top. So thank you again for what you have done. Taiwo is going to send out more information about the upcoming council presentation on the 14th. But before we sign out tonight, I have a surprise for you. Mayor Lyles, who has been listening in, has some closing comments to make. Mayor, I hope you're still there.
I'm still here. I promise you I'm still here. I want to say, if we could have this kind of robust discussion in a way that people care so greatly about this community, every Monday night at City Council, I think we'd be much, much better off. So any of you that want to come down and help us do better at the way that we deal with some of our very toughest issues, I would just use you as an exemplary example of contributions to our community, our citizenship, our dialogue, our ability to tackle tough issues and come out with really great plans. I really want to say thank you to each one of you. I want to say thank you to Mayor Gant for his leadership on this. Today, I had the opportunity to talk about Charlotte Moves, and the examples that you have provided for us and the thoughtfulness and the recommendations that you've discussed tonight, I want you to know they're essential to the core values that we have as a city. If we're going to have a livable city, I say at the very basic, we have to have people that have the opportunity to have a job. They have to have a place to live, and they have to have a way to move between those two opportunities in a way that gives them time also to thrive for their whatever circumstance they have, for whatever creativity or pursuit that they have. And we have done over 10,000 new jobs in this community in the last 2 years. We have 4,000 affordable housing units under contract or new construction or renovation in the last 2 years. But your effort really completes the full circle for all of us. This circle of the idea of how do we create mobility impacts so much about how do we plan to have a great city, how our planning efforts work, how do we deal with a great environment, how do we actually give people opportunities that we can continue to grow a robust economy in this city. And even coming out of this pandemic, what you're doing will help us create new jobs for people that are here. So and I've heard all of the comments tonight, and I know that this is challenging, but I also know that there is sometimes a moment in a city's history, a time that you have to take a bold step. And I'm confident that if you'll stay with us and help us move this forward, that we're going to be successful in this effort. And one day you'll be able to say the work that you've done really speaks forward for the next generation. So thank you very much for what you've done. And tonight was just exceptional. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your vision and your leadership. And once again, thank you, task force members. And I hope you will, some of you will come at least to the council presentation on the 14th. I suppose that's virtual also, isn't it?
Yes.
So I'm sure we'll link you into that. Tyrone?
Yes. I just wanted to say quickly that we have received all your comments on the draft report, including tonight. We will revise the draft report with your comments. We will amend some language where necessary to reflect what we've heard tonight. We plan to send the report out to council next week, towards the end of next week. And when we send it to council, we will send it to you as well, just so that you see that your thoughts and what you've shared with us are reflected. And then once that document becomes public, Pedro, I heard you loud and clear. We'll make sure that people are able to read it in their languages. We've done that with our TOD document, and we know that we can do the same thing with this one as well. So just so you all know, that document will come to you revised, and then we will be presenting that to council on December 14th. So I will send details of that later on. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you and good night. Have a happy holiday.